This here is our Taunton Deane perennial kale. This is not how it naturally grows. Because we've got quite a small area in the yard, we've actually crown lifted this one, so you can see its stem here. This is its third year. We have to tie in the branches because otherwise they can get a bit heavy on the ends and fall over in the wind, but it's a fantastic kale. It looks quite tough on its leaves, but when you cook it, it's very sweet and tender, really fantastic flavour. In the summer it gets attacked, you know, a bit by butterflies, by the caterpillars, not as much as this variegated one does, but you can see it's now mid-November and it's just put on loads of growth. In about September time it seems to put on a second flush of growth, and there's plenty of leaves here. And you can see right in here we've staked it here to keep it upright. It's very top heavy, but you can see how much planting space it gives us underneath the kale. Normally the Taunton Deane, it sort of falls over and swamps out things underneath it, so by lifting this one up we've managed to grow all sorts of things underneath it, so it gives us an extra bit of space to crop. This one below it is a much smaller leaved one. It's a variegated version of Daubenton called Panache, and here, as with the Taunton Deane, if you don't stake this one, you can see here that this branch has fallen over, and where it's fallen over it's sent up all these shoots here which are fantastic for taking cuttings of. So you can simply pull one off like this, and then you can actually plant that straight into the ground. So you'd put all of this bit into the ground, just leave this bit up, and then you'd get a new plant. So these perennial kales are fantastic because you don't have to replant them every year, you know, they just keep growing, and they're so easy, as you can see, to take cuttings from to grow more, so you can never run out of kale with those. Here's the Taunton Deane kale in another part of the garden. It's actually been planted way over here, and as you can see it's grown up and then it's flopped over and it's actually taking up a large area of the yard, which doesn't really matter for this year, but if I left it any longer it would end up right in the pathway, so I'll be cutting it back a bit this year. But you can see the difference in terms of its habit here. It's really sprawled out, whereas with the other one we staked it up high so that all of its leaves could be much higher up. So I'll be cutting this one right back and hopefully being able to contain it a bit over there. We're in the forest garden area now. It's very wild up here. The plants don't get mollycoddled as much as they do down in the yard. This is another Taunton Deane kale here, growing really happily in amongst the grass and the nettles without much looking after whatsoever. It's doing really well, and particularly even when the caterpillars were around in the summer, this one didn't seem to have quite as much damage, whether that's because we're surrounded by birds here. So this one's about 2 years old, so 2 years ago we stuck a cutting in the ground and this is what we've got now. So you can see plenty of kale that's ready to eat, and it'll continue growing through the winter, giving us crops all the way through the winter. Here's one that we stuck in the summer. So we just made a hole in the ground with a stick and then pushed the cutting into the ground. So this one will be growing here quite happily. You can see today how hardy they are. It's covered in this beautiful hoarfrost, but as soon as it defrosts it'll be perfectly fine, ready to eat. I'm going to take some cuttings from this kale here. I'm going to take some cuttings to put straight into the ground, right into the thatch of nettles and grass and all sorts. That's exactly what we did with this one here, and this is 2 years old now. So I've got some decent sized growth on. There are some smaller cutting bits suitable for cuttings in here as well, which are much smaller, and they'd be great for potting up into a pot to grow on in a bit more of a protected place. But if I'm sticking them straight out into the ground, it's nice for them to be a bit taller, sitting a bit further above the ground, so there's less competition and they can get away. That's how we planted this one here. So if you want to come in, so these smaller bits here, these bits would be perfect for putting into a pot, some of these smaller pieces. I'm going to choose this nice bit here, it's nice and straight, and I'm going to take what's called a heel cutting, and if I just pull this bit off like this, it has some of the stem here, so that's why we call it a heel cutting. We haven't chopped it off with secateurs, we've actually pulled it off from the stem, and that'll go straight in the ground. So we've got our cutting now, and we're on the place where we're going to push the cutting into the ground. You can see here there's been lots of nettles and things growing here, so there's a lot of thatch. We're not going to dig a hole or anything. I'm simply going to push a hole into the ground with a bar. So you want something that's just a bit bigger diameter than the cutting, but nothing too big, because really you want the contact from the soil with the stem, because that's how it's going to root. So that one's a bit big for now, so I'm going to use this one here. You can also, if you don't have a suitable bar, you can just use a spade to make a slit. Waggle your spade in the ground as deep as you can. So I'm just going to hammer that in a bit, move it around. Make a bit of a hole. And I'm simply going to push that in, then push it back with my heel, just to try and get the stem to have contact with the soil. And it doesn't matter at all about all of this. If you want, you could put a cardboard mulch around it just to keep the weeds down for a year, but we haven't bothered. We didn't bother with the other one and it grew fine. So it really is as easy as that.